Hey everyone, I had promised you a video about microeconomics lessons that can be learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. It's taken me some time to put together this presentation, but here it is. The COVID-19 pandemic is a good example of an event that affects markets. The pandemic has had all sorts of effects on the demand, the supply, and on the equilibrium in markets. The event, for example, has affected people's tastes and preferences. As a result of the pandemic, more and more people stuck at home have been wanting to make bread, for example. The pandemic has also affected people's expectations. So, expecting shortages of products, expecting higher prices. Buyers have been stockpiling. The pandemic, of course, has also affected people's incomes. Now that Canada is officially in a recession as a result of the pandemic, what's happened is people's incomes have fallen quite significantly. So the pandemic, by affecting the demand in markets, has in some cases lowered demand for things like transportation, transit, air travel, for leisure, and for clothing. The pandemic has also reduced the demand for oil. If people are not traveling as much anymore, there's less demand for oil and gasoline. And we've seen the impacts of this in the form of lower gasoline prices. The pandemic has also affected the supply side. Um, Businesses have had to close as a result of government requirements for social distancing. The pandemic, on the other hand, has increased the demand for certain products. So things like surgical masks used in the healthcare system, toilet paper as people stockpile, leisure wear as people remain at home more often or seeking more comfortable clothing. Businesses have been responding to the COVID pandemic by shifting to what they produce. So distilleries, which produce alcohol, are now shifting towards substitutes in production. They're producing hand sanitizers. Automobile companies are producing ventilators for use in hospitals. Businesses are also changing their business model. So restaurants have been shifting more towards pickup, pickup and delivery. And some restaurants have even started offering groceries. Uh, Other businesses, retailers, universities and colleges have shifted more of their business to online. So the pandemic, by affecting demand and supply, ultimately also affect the equilibrium in markets. So what we're seeing in some markets are significant changes in prices. So surgical masks, for example, their prices are up significantly. On the other hand, in the oil market, prices have fallen significantly. In fact, prices have even become negative for a short period of time. So the pandemic is a good example, again, of an application of the principles of demand and supply that we saw in our economics course. The pandemic also helps to illustrate something else. In our course, we looked at what products were luxuries, necessities, and inferior goods based on price elasticity of demand and based on income elasticity of demand. Well, the pandemic has also highlighted what products fall into these categories. Groceries, for example, are recognized as an essential or necessary product. And as a result of the pandemic, as a result of lower incomes, people are buying more groceries. They are replacing meals eaten out with homemade meals. People are also flocking to alcohol, partly to help them cope with the stresses of the pandemic. But alcohol is another example of a product that's been revealed to be an essential product. In fact, in the United States, guns have been have been shown to be essential products as well. In places like China, where the social distancing measures have been relaxed and businesses are starting to open, um, incomes, of course, are still significantly lower than before. So what we're seeing in places like China, even though businesses have reopened, are very low sales in restaurants, while consumers have switched to consuming more inferior goods, such as instant noodles and such as coffee made at home. So the pandemic, again, provides a very useful application to looking at elasticity and what products are luxuries, necessities, and inferior products. Another key lesson to be learned in our economics course was the difference between fixed costs of business and variable costs of business. Examples of fixed costs include rent, include interest on business loans. Well, many businesses during the pandemic have shut down. They've closed their doors. They're selling zero output. However, while producing zero output may lower some of their costs, essentially their variable costs, businesses still have fixed costs to pay. They still have to pay rent. So closed retail stores, for example, still have rent to pay. And despite government assistance to help businesses pay their rent, many businesses are saying that the government assistance is insufficient. The rent costs continue to accrue to businesses and are leading to very significant financial losses. In fact, many small businesses, in the best of times, make very low economic profit. So they do not expect during the pandemic, when they're making massive losses, to be able to offset those losses in the future. As a result, many businesses, in fact, are shutting down for good. They're exiting the market. They're unable to continue to produce their product and therefore are shutting down forever. One last thing that I'd like to highlight from the COVID pandemic is the role that governments can play. So in our microeconomics course, we talked about all sorts of forms of intervention that governments can take in markets. Well, the pandemic has illustrated also some examples of government intervention. Governments have implemented income support programs. For example, for people who qualify, the government is providing $2,000 per month or $500 per week to help support low-income people or people who've lost their incomes in order to allow them to maintain their spending on necessities. The government has also provided support for small businesses. One of the things that the federal government has done is to subsidize wages of businesses to help cover the cost of wages for businesses. In fact, a number of companies have announced that they will rehire workers that they previously laid off because of these wage subsidies. Another example of a government form of intervention is what the government is doing to help students. So the government is also providing income support for students. Also for international students, the government is changing policies and allowing international students to work more than 20 hours per week. So what I'd like to say about the COVID-19 pandemic is, again, it's provided a lot of economic lessons that we've looked at in Economics 1220. So I hope this short video will give you a sense of how many of the things that we learned in the course are being borne out by what's happening in the real world because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope everyone is safe and healthy, and I wish you much success in your academic and professional careers. Cheers.